I was staring at a $2.3 million contract when I realized the ghost pouring my ice water was the daughter-in-law my son claimed had abandoned us. But the true nightmare wasn't her stained uniform, nor the 8-month pregnant belly straining against the fabric. Gasps. It was the horrifying confession she sobbed into the freezing alleyway out back. A secret proving the morning tea my own flesh and blood brewed for me was methodically turning my organs to ash. Sighs. What do you do when the boy you raised becomes the monster you must destroy? The fountain pen felt like a lead pipe in my grip. I, Mitchell Stone, 59 years old and holding a commercial construction empire in my palm, was drowning in the opulent dining room of Belmont's. The heavy scent of roasted garlic and floor polish, usually the aroma of victory, only amplified the nausea climbing up my throat. My hands, which had erected the city's highest steel spines, shook violently. A sickening tremor made the gold nib skip across the signature line. Across the mahogany table, Gerald, my partner of 2 decades, sighed. His silk tie reflected the chandelier's mocking glare. He asked if the numbers were wrong, his voice laced with the impatience of a man eager for his next commission. I blamed the lighting, my voice sounding like crushed gravel. How does a man with $45 million feel entirely powerless? The room spun. I desperately needed to sign the paperwork before my vision went completely black. Then a heavy, dragging shuffle approached our booth. It wasn't the crisp, invisible glide of high-end waitstaff. A server stepped into my peripheral vision, her frail shoulders struggling beneath the immense weight of her late-term pregnancy. I looked up to order water. The breath violently left my lungs. Hannah Vance, 25 years old, the woman my son Preston swore was a manipulative gold digger who had fled to Europe with another man. She stood inches away, trembling so violently the ice in the pitcher rattled. "Good evening," she whispered, her eyes glued to the tablecloth. "Water," I choked out, the syllables scraping my throat. She placed the glass down, a silver fork slipping from her tray and clattering violently against the marble floor. She didn't dare retrieve it. She simply turned and fled toward the kitchen, her uneven gait highlighting her immense physical pain. Gerald kept droning on about equity splits, utterly blind to the fact that the infamous runaway bride was bussing tables in a restaurant we co-owned. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable. But this wasn't loneliness. This was survival. I shoved the million-dollar contract aside, ignoring Gerald's frantic protests. I stormed past the maitre d', breaching the sacred boundary of the swinging kitchen doors. The refined scent of expensive wine was instantly obliterated by humid grease and scalding steam. I ignored the screaming chefs and zeroed in on the prep station. Hannah was hunched in the shadows, her face buried in her raw, blistered hands. When I demanded she look at me, she flinched like a beaten animal. She grabbed my tailored lapel, dragging me toward the dim, dry storage corridor. The sheer terror in her eyes wasn't just fear, it was the bone-deep certainty that my son was going to kill her. Preston told everyone she left him, I whispered, sick to my stomach. She let out a fractured, agonizing laugh. She revealed that if Preston discovered the baby, he would legally strip the child from her to secure the Stone family trust. My son hadn't just driven her away, he had threatened to institutionalize her. Before I could process the betrayal, the restaurant manager's voice echoed nearby. I didn't hesitate. I shoved past the kitchen staff, dragging Hannah out the heavy metal service exit into the 28-degree Philadelphia winter. The freezing alleyway smelled of wet cardboard and rotting produce. I threw my heavy wool coat over her shivering shoulders, but she violently recoiled. She began to rapidly dismantle every lie my son had planted. The psychological torment had been relentless. Preston hadn't just broken her spirit. He had moved his mistress into their guest bedroom, months before Hannah even fled. And the mistress? Brooke Sterling, a junior executive I had personally terminated for forging financial documents. They wore her clothes, they mocked her at the dinner table. But then Hannah's voice dropped to a terrified frequency that froze the blood in my veins. "Brooke brought the powders," she sobbed, her lips turning a dangerous shade of blue. They put them in your morning coffee. The dizzy spells, the sudden terrifying weakness. It wasn't age, it was a methodical assassination. Are you beginning to see how deep the betrayal went? If you're feeling the tension I felt in that freezing alley, let me know you're still with me by tapping the like button. Suddenly, Hannah's knees buckled. She collapsed into the snow-dusted gravel, clutching her swollen stomach in sheer agony. I roared for my driver. Henry didn't ask questions. He violently mounted the curb with my luxury sedan. I carried Hannah's skeletal frame into the leather back seat, screaming at Henry to blow every red light toward Penn Medicine. During that frantic, terrifying ride, Hannah drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering that Brooke had bragged about the specific industrial chemical warehouse where she purchased the toxins. At the ER, the blinding fluorescent lights swallowed her. Dr. Catherine Mills, a veteran obstetrician, delivered the crushing verdict: severe malnutrition, profound dehydration, and clinical exhaustion. My unborn grandson was feeding off his mother's fading life force. I refused to leave her exposed. I arranged a phantom discharge, smuggling her through service elevators to the Regency Hotel's $50,000 a week presidential suite. I placed the entire floor under a maintenance lockdown. She was finally safe. But as I watched her sleep, a text buzzed in my pocket. Preston, mockingly asking if I was feeling weak again. By dawn, I was kicking in the door to Preston's glass-walled luxury loft. He answered in a silk robe, sipping espresso, feigning condescending concern about my health. Behind him, lounging on the Italian leather sofa, was Brooke. She was wearing Hannah's designer robe, swirling her coffee with a sociopathic smirk. When I demanded to know where my daughter-in-law was, Preston casually slid a forged manila folder across the marble island. He claimed it was definitive proof Hannah had embezzled millions before vanishing. He expected the poison to have made me stupid. He was wrong. I didn't touch the folder. I laughed. I told him that if a freelance accountant could siphon millions under his watch, he was grossly incompetent. I fired him on the spot. I pulled out my phone and froze his corporate accounts right in front of his face. His smug mask instantly shattered into a pathetic, purple-faced rage. He screamed that the money was his birthright. Brooke simply watched, a calculating viper calculating the new odds. As I walked out, Preston hurled a mug at the wall, screaming that I was already a ghost. Returning to the Regency, Hannah handed me a battered backpack containing the real truth. A hidden ledger. She showed me exactly how Preston and Brooke had siphoned $750,000 through phantom shell companies. But tucked in the very back was the smoking gun, a physical receipt from the chemical supplier bearing Brooke's signature. Desire whispers louder than guilt. They wanted it all, and they wanted it now. I drove straight to Dr. Alan Fisher, an elite toxicologist who operated a private lab. I rolled up my sleeve and let him draw my sluggish, contaminated blood. Dr. Fisher's face drained of color as he confirmed my worst fear. Industrial-grade arsenic, administered in microdoses to perfectly mimic natural heart failure. I then met with a forensic accountant, Rebecca, in a windowless office. She didn't just trace the stolen $750,000 to Brooke's offshore accounts. She uncovered something infinitely more depraved. Preston had digitally forged my biometric signature to increase my life insurance policy to $10 million. He wasn't just stealing my legacy, he was actively monetizing my murder. Could you smile at the person measuring you for a coffin? I returned to the hotel, my soul completely numb. As I sat beside Hannah, I placed my hand on her stomach. A sharp, powerful kick struck my palm. Baby Owen! That tiny, defiant movement instantly rewrote my entire universe. I wasn't just fighting for my company anymore, I was fighting a holy war for my bloodline. I began taking the chemical antidotes Dr. Fisher prescribed, hiding them inside my vitamin capsules. But around Preston, I became the ultimate actor. I slurred my words, I dragged my feet. I let him believe his inheritance accelerator was working perfectly. The next morning, Preston arrived at my estate with the poisoned Earl Grey tea. I slumped in my armchair, feigning near paralysis. When he turned his back to adjust the window blinds, I moved with lethal speed. I swapped our porcelain cups. He turned back, arrogant and smiling, and drank deeply from the cup meant to kill me. He signed his own confession with a swallow. Within minutes, he stumbled, his eyes glazing over as the heavy sedative hit his untainted nervous system. I watched him leave, savoring the poetic justice. Meanwhile, my private investigator, Mark Sullivan, pulled the warehouse security footage. We watched Brooke, disguised in an oversized wig, buying the arsenic using a framed junior employee's stolen credentials. Furthermore, she was already consulting extradition lawyers. They were preparing to flee the country. I immediately transferred Hannah to a secondary, unlisted fortress, my private Rittenhouse Square limestone villa. I leaked a fake rumor that Hannah was working at a diner to send Preston on a wild goose chase in the slums. Mark's surveillance showed Preston frantically searching garbage cans, eventually meeting with a known street thug. He wasn't looking to bring Hannah home. He was hiring a hitman to tie up loose ends. But the stress proved too much. In the dead of night, Hannah gasped in agony. Her water broke weeks early. As I helped her toward the door, a terrifying red laser dot danced across the nursery wall. The hitman had found the villa. I shoved Hannah into the shadows. We barely made it into Henry's idling car, tearing through the back alleys of Philadelphia with our headlights completely off. Henry executed brutal evasion maneuvers, shaking the pursuing vehicle just blocks before we crashed into the secure ambulance bay at Penn Medicine. The sterile ward became our final bunker. While Hannah screamed in the agonizing throes of premature labor, my burner phone vibrated. It was a photo from a corrupt hospital guard, showing my town car idling outside. The perimeter was breached. Then the crying started. Baby Owen was born. 6 pounds of pure screaming defiance, bearing the exact jagged birthmark on his shoulder that my own father had. He was perfect. But my joy was instantly strangled when Preston called the burner phone. He sneered that he was filing for emergency custody to seize the child. He gloated that Brooke had intercepted my preliminary blood work, proving I was too poisoned to fight back. "Say goodbye to the boy," he hissed. "You're already a ghost." He thought he had me cornered. He had no idea the room was already wired with explosives. I secretly transferred 49% of my corporate shares into an ironclad, irrevocable trust for baby Owen. Then I sent Preston a text inviting him to the Regency Hotel to sign a final settlement. I knew his insatiable greed would blind him to the trap. I sat behind the mahogany desk in the presidential suite, the room heavily wired with hidden microphones. Detective Ramirez and his tactical unit waited in the adjoining bedroom. At noon, Preston and Brooke strutted in, practically vibrating with triumphant arrogance. Preston told me to sign the papers so I could finally rest. I didn't sign anything. I slid the official toxicology report across the wood. Brooke lunged to snatch it, but I caught her wrist with a crushing grip that shattered the illusion of my frailty. The blood completely vanished from her face. Preston's fake smile morphed into utter panic. I slammed the massive forensic audit onto the desk, methodically detailing every stolen dollar, every forged signature, and every lethal dose. Preston demanded the baby, threatening to lock Hannah in a psych ward if I didn't capitulate. He lunged toward the bedroom door, convinced Owen was inside. He ripped the door open. He wasn't met with a crib. He was met with the cold steel barrels of 3 police service weapons. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting around my son's wrist was the most devastating and satisfying sound of my entire life. He dropped to his knees, sobbing hysterically, instantly blaming Brooke for the entire conspiracy. But during the chaotic arrest, the scent of floral perfume faded. Brooke had slipped out the service exit. I found a GPS tracker hidden in the folder she left behind. She wasn't running to the airport. She was heading straight for the Rittenhouse villa to kidnap Owen. I ordered my driver to fly. But when I arrived at the villa, Brooke was already in steel restraints, screaming violently at the officers. I had intentionally left the back gate unlatched, luring her into a predetermined tactical net. She wanted the stone legacy, but all she got was a concrete cell. The war was finally over. The following week, I systematically purged the corporate boardroom, firing every corrupt director who had colluded with my son. I reinstated the innocent employees Preston had framed, handing them heavy settlement envelopes and their dignity back. Preston was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. As he was led away in chains, he spat that I had traded my son for a stranger's baby. I didn't even blink. He was nothing but a memory. I legally adopted Hannah, giving her absolute voting power and installing her as the head of internal audit and ethics. Furthermore, I used the recovered offshore funds to rescue her parents, Silas and Martha, who Preston had viciously blackmailed into silence. I flew them to Philadelphia for the foundation gala, watching Hannah collapse into her mother's arms in tears. I sit here now, holding Owen on a park bench in Rittenhouse Square. The poison is entirely flushed from my veins. The corporate machine no longer dictates my heartbeat. I wrote a final journal for Owen, securing his inheritance behind a blockchain trust that only unlocks if he proves his moral character. What would you do if the person you loved most tried to bury you alive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of ultimate betrayal and absolute justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button to hear more psychological confessions. Trust is a luxury. Survival is mandatory. Stay safe out there.